Good evening. I'd like to thank you all for tuning in tonight and joining us for the Rock of Faith in Community Conversations. For those of you that don't know, the Rock of Faith Community Conversations are an extension of the original Rock of Faith concert that started a little over 10 years ago. This was a concert that I started to talk about addiction in the community, and I used my own story to tell the story of the transformation of the soul into recovery. Since then, I've used other people's stories and basically use it to get more information about what's going on in our community with opioid addiction. The proceeds of the concerts generally have been given to different nonprofits in the Cleveland area, as well as some sober houses. And this year, the proceeds of the concert will be going to Cornerstone Housing. That is a group of houses on the west side of Cleveland that are run by Hillary Yance and Chuck Kraft. They have been running these houses for over 10 years, and they provide a quality, sober environment for men and women that are working on their recovery from addiction. This year, the concert will be held on September 25th at 7 p.m., right here in the sanctuary of First Baptist Church of Greater Cleveland, which is where we are tonight. We will have two options. You can come and see us live this year, but you will need to wear a mask, or you will be able to watch it on our YouTube channel virtually, whichever you prefer. I would be remiss if I didn't say that the Rock of Faith Community Conversations and our ability to educate the community was really the result of a grant that we received. And with the help of Relevant Therapeutic Connections and Charday Hollins, this grant allowed us the resources to provide more education and support to the community. Again, this year we also received a grant, and therefore we have expanded what we've been doing for the Rock of Faith and the community conversations, as well as some other things for our youth and our youth ministry, which began actually as early as January of this year. We had a couple events, I think, in February, another one in April, and then starting in June, Kelly Pernicone and I, who is sitting 2 seats over from me, along with the help of the Stella Maris Outreach Team and Thrive Community Behavioral Health, we have distributed over 500 NARCAN, as well as several hundred doTERRA bags, and those are little charcoal bags that people can dispose of their medications in. We will also be there in September in the parking lot of First Baptist Church for anyone that has a need for a doTERRA bag to dispose of medications that they have at home, or anyone that feels that they might have a need to have a NARCAN, which is what we use to reverse opioid overdose. Please come and grab one. They are free at no cost to you. We're just there to help you. I also want to bring awareness to the fact that during the pandemic of COVID-19, opioid overdoses have increased almost 30%. And in the year of 2020, we actually had 93,000 opioid overdoses, which is the most on record in any year ever. We believe that a lot of this has to do with the fact that the pandemic caused a lot of problems socially in our community, one of them being that it shut down community, meaning that the churches were closing and everything was virtual. There were 12-step recovery meetings were closing. You couldn't go to those, as well as the fact that it became more difficult to access treatment if you were looking for treatment, because the agencies that were providing treatment lowered their census in order to provide a safer environment and keep their clients from getting COVID-19. Some agencies also were forced to close their doors for a certain period of time because they had a COVID outbreak or they didn't have the staff. And so, therefore, people that had mental illness or had drug addiction were isolated, and that has caused a huge problem. So today, we really want to focus this year a little bit on mental health and addiction, and how those two kind of go together, and how those two can one affect the other. And we're very fortunate today to have Dr. James Soros with us, who is a psychiatrist for well over 40 years dealing with adult and adolescent mental health. To tell you a little bit about Dr. Soros, he is a graduate of Case Western Reserve as a chemistry major. He then went on to medical school at Ohio State University and returned to Cleveland to complete his residency at University Hospitals in Cleveland. He has since worked at several inpatient psychiatric facilities, such as St. Luke's, St. Vincent Charity Hospital, Windsor Laurelwood, and currently he is at Highland Springs, focusing on dual diagnosis, substance use disorders. He has been the interim chief medical officer at all 3 of these hospitals and at the same time maintained a private practice for over 40 years, focusing on anxiety disorders, personality disorders, and general psychiatric issues. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Jim Soros.
Thank you, Carol. 40 years, that's a long time. Let me begin to try to focus on the correlation between substance abuse and suicidality. Before I start, I wanted to comment a little bit about what Carol said about COVID. I could talk for most of the time about that, and I'll try not to give some information about substance abuse and suicidality. But my catch line about COVID is that if you have anxiety or depression prior to COVID, it's 10 times worse. If you didn't have anxiety and depression before COVID, you now have anxiety and depression. So it has just affected everyone for some of the reasons that Carol talked about, and the difficulties of getting proper treatment, particularly as an outpatient, have been more than challenged. The second point that I wanted to make as I'm starting this is that suicide is often confused across the board by the general population, sometimes by insurance companies, as if it's a diagnosis of its own. So sometimes one will be asked, well, is this patient suicidal or not? Suicide behavior, attempting suicide, completing suicide, is a symptom. It's a symptom of a variety of illnesses, but mostly it's a symptom of depression. Unless you're a French philosopher and you think that life isn't worth living, which is an independent issue. But if anyone is actually trying to take their life, it doesn't mean that they're just suicidal. You have to make the proper diagnosis. And that is one of the important points I want to emphasize tonight, is that making a diagnosis, appropriate diagnosis of substance abuse, making an appropriate diagnosis of depression is the beginning. What you learn in medical school is that taking an accurate history is the most important thing you'll ever do. More important than a diagnostic test, more important than any fancy machine, more important than even doing the physical exam. And in psychiatry, it is even that much more important. So it's very, very important to find out what's going on in their life and what the relevant symptoms are. I'm not a real big believer of flooding everyone with statistics, but as I started to read some of these, they even blew me away. So I'm just going to talk about a few, and then we'll talk about substance abuse and mood disorders and the correlation between them. Suicide is the second leading cause of adolescent and young adults from the ages of 10 to 34. So it is an enormous problem, gotten worse, but it's always been bad, and it's something that we have to continue to pay attention to. 50% of suicides are associated with some form of dependency, some form of substance abuse, not dependency in being in a personality disorder, but dependency in terms of substance abuse. And 25% of people that are addicted to either drugs or alcohol either commit suicide or make a suicide attempt. And 90% of completed suicides the individual had either depression, substance abuse, or both. So how do you take a look at these two issues independently? And then the real key is, how do you begin to try to approach someone that has both? Because that's really the connection and the correlation, and that is the ultimate challenge. So I'm just going to read you some symptoms or some characteristics, some of the risk factors, and I'm not going to give you a quiz because they all sound the same. So I'm going to read you the risk factors of substance abuse, and then I'm going to read you the risk factors of depression, and you'll see just how similar they are. So first we'll start with the risk factors of substance abuse: depression, ADHD, post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, aggressive behavior, access to substances, peer pressure, stress, financial stress, family history of abuse or trauma, and family history of addiction. What are the risk factors of depression and or suicide? Risk factors of suicide are depression, bipolar, schizophrenia, anxiety, aggressive behavior, substance abuse, access to lethal means, prolonged sleep disorder, financial stress, past suicide, family history of suicide. As you see with those risk factors, they overlap quite a bit. Yes, there can be some distinctions if you're technically trying to separate out the two issues. So we go back again to taking an accurate history. We have grown in terms of having in inpatient hospitals, and as you heard, a lot of my career has been focused on inpatient hospitals, being able to begin to try to treat both disorders. So there are units that are called dual units, where you attempt to try to treat appropriately and aggressively both the mood disorder or the depression and the substance abuse at the same time. And we didn't used to do that. We used to have a unit for depression, and we used to have a unit for substance abuse, or a unit just for detox, and so we still have a unit for detox. And hopefully on the units for detox, in whatever facility it is, there are adequate histories being taken, adequate mental health professionals, social workers, psychologists, and psychiatrists that are there to try to make a diagnosis. So we've made some strides with that. I think in my point of view right now, that's where we've grown. Where we haven't grown is what happens when you send these people home, or the people that don't get admitted. Some people will go to AA, some people will go see a therapist, some people will not do either. A very few amount of people will do both. But the whole point of having two diagnoses that are, either one of them are difficult to treat alone, either one of them can result in serious life consequences, including the potential for suicide, is the real challenge. My metaphor for some of the patients that were in the hospital is, it's like if you don't like your job and you're overwhelmed with your job, and every day you have to drag your you-know-what to work to try to just get through the day. That's like having depression or substance abuse. And then your solution to that is to take a second job. Well, it sounds silly, right? Doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but that's what's happening, where either way that you started, whether you started with depression and you add substance abuse, or you started with substance abuse and it develops into depression, you weren't able to handle the first one very well, because it's just that hard to handle. It's not a human weakness, it's just that hard. And if you weren't able to handle the first one, how on God's earth are you ever going to be able to handle both of them? And the answer is, you're not. So the two of them then feed off each other, because as you heard those kinds of symptoms and those kinds of risks, the risk of one adds to the risk of the other, and the next thing you know, the real kind of hot buttons of what has someone actually begin to attempt things, hopelessness, impulsivity, severe stress, overwhelms the person, and they may make an attempt. And Carol and I actually were talking beforehand. It is very difficult to be able to figure out if someone was really intended or not. Oftentimes I've interviewed someone the next day after they're making a suicide attempt in the hospital, and they'll say, oh, they're feeling better now. They got in the hospital, they're ready to go, they don't want to be there that long. How long do I have to be there? They don't like my answer, which is until you get better. They want to go home in a day or two, and I say, well, what about the attempt you made? Oh, that was just alcohol. And my answer to that is usually, you know what, there's many, many, many million people last night that drank alcohol, and there are not many, many, many people last night who attempted to try to take their life. But the problem is that they don't see that there are two problems, that there is a problem with alcohol and a problem with some form of depression. They may not meet the criteria, the actual diagnostic manual criteria for depression, but there's something going on that they need to try to figure out. So that's the challenge. And the challenge is that either of those issues are difficult in and of themselves. And to have to deal with both things is really a huge task. To make it complicated even more so, which is something we often don't talk about a lot, you heard me talk about anxiety. One of the problems of trying to treat anxiety and people with substance abuse, it's very clear that anyone who's worked with people with substance abuse understand that if they have psychiatric symptoms, they are often trying to self-medicate. They're trying to treat themselves. They're trying to somehow feel better, somehow not feel as badly, feel less hopeless. And if they have anxiety disorders, they say, well, what's going to help with my anxiety? And the problem is that in one of the few, and I'm not an internist, so I can't tell you how many disorders, but anxiety disorders are one of the few disorders where the best treatment is contraindicated because of the secondary diagnosis or the concomitant diagnosis. That's very difficult. That's very sad to me. I feel horrible as a doctor and very guilty saying, well, I can't give you what's really going to help you because you are addicted to something else. You're addicted to cocaine or opiates or alcohol, and what's going to help your anxiety the most, I can't give you. You wouldn't say that to somebody that has hypertension. Well, I've got this really good drug, but you can't have it. And so patients understand that. And so it's hard to get them to stop using substances because they want to go out and self-medicate. And those other medicines that we use, I'm really honest with my patients, they work a little bit. And the patients understand that they work a little bit. The other things work a lot. They work very well. They're not cures. So you have a whole lot of things that are going on when you're trying to see the correlation between substance abuse and suicidality. And it takes an awful lot of very well-organized treatment approach that starts as an inpatient, but most importantly follows up as an outpatient, even to the point, as people that have been in AA know, that people don't generally ask for help prior to being impulsive. So in my experience, and I'm not in AA, but in my experience with that, most people end up, and I don't have any data on it, maybe other people here do, most people end up calling their sponsor after they drink. And that's nice that they call their sponsor after they drink, but they're supposed to kind of call their sponsor before they drink. Well, okay, so it's not the end of the world, but in suicidality, it can be the end of the world because we don't know when they really want to die or were they just feeling that way. You know, most of the time they didn't really want to die and they're glad that it didn't happen, even if they're severely depressed. So you have a lot of different variables that make it hard to kind of help people. And just like not calling the sponsor, you know, people that make, quote, contracts with their outpatient doctor or their friend or their family or their spouse and say, I'm going to call. When they say that to you, if you push them hard enough and they say they're going to call, they know they're not going to call most of the time. They say, yeah, I'll tell you that if that's going to make you feel better. And I've stood at the door of my office, literally, saying, I'm not letting you out of this office until you tell me that you'll call me. And they said, if you want me to just tell you that I'll call you, I'll tell you that I'll call you. But you know that I'm probably not going to do it. So this is a hard problem, and there is no simple solution to it other than the trust that you build up, just as you do with a sponsor, and over time maybe the person will call you, and they have called me. But when you get into that situation, it's not that they're trying to be difficult. At that moment, they're not thinking clearly. And one of the things we know about substance abuse, that catchy little term, stinking thinking, well, it's the same thing about depression and all of the disorders that I put down. You know, we have a very fancy word about how to treat depression and those things. It's called cognitive therapy. I like to simplify things. What cognitive therapy means is a very fancy way of saying you don't know what you're talking about. You're not able to think this through on your own. And cognitively, which means I'm going to tell you politely and supportively, as a professional, how you ought to be thinking about it. You know, so you have a lot of things to have to overcome. We haven't even talked about medicine, and I want to, you know, have us move on, but there are an enormous amount of challenges. Most of them, again, used to be at least having units that began to start focusing on both things. Now we're not bad at that. We're not great at it yet, but we're not bad at it. The outpatient is a whole different ball game with families and loved ones and therapists and sponsors, and trying to coordinate all that, trying to coordinate major treatment of two different independent disorders, psychiatric disorders, that are very difficult to treat one of those disorders, yet both of them, and yet either of them or the combination of the two can lead to impulsivity and can lead to suicide attempts and, unfortunately, successful suicides.
Thank you very much, Dr. Soros, for joining us. I really, really appreciate that. And I just want to say to anyone that's out there that might be suffering from addiction or from depression or any kind of mental health problem, that there is help out there. And on our website, on the bottom of the screen, there's a number for you to call or reach out to your church, you know, or reach out to a family member or friend and ask someone to help you. Definitely, there is help out there. I know one other thing that I wanted to mention about Dr. Soros was talking about outpatient treatment, and outpatient treatment is a little bit difficult right now, especially during the pandemic, because there's a lot of telehealth going on. That makes it a little more difficult to connect. But there are people out there that want to help you, so please reach out. I also have with me tonight 3 young people that I would like to give a few minutes to talk to you, the audience that's out there listening. And they're 3 young people that have all been through addiction of their own and have their own story to tell, and they are now living a totally different life in recovery. And it's a story of hope. For those of you that are out there that think that there is no hope, I'm hoping that they're going to share just exactly what their hope is. So the first person I'm going to introduce to you is Kelly Pernicone. And Kelly and I have worked together a lot on the Rock of Faith for many, many years. She is a member of this church with me, so we know each other quite well. And she's going to talk about her mental health and how it affected her drug use. And she will also share all the exciting things going on in her life today. So with that, I'm going to give you Kelly Pernicone.
Thank you. Thank you, Carol, and thank you, Dr. Soros, for sharing that information. I kind of felt like you were telling like what I'm about to say. Like I felt so much of that. A lot of like my story has to do with me trying to hide who I was, and who I was is the person that I am right now. Looking back, a lot of it I think stems from traumatic experiences, and not necessarily, you know, within the family. It's, you know, it was a house flooding when I was really little and having to go to a couple different schools and leaving my friends that I made and having to make new friends like 3 times when I was just learning how to socialize. And I think that that's had such an impact on my interactions even now. But when I was younger, especially when I was in high school and when I started college, it got really, really difficult to kind of put on a facade so that people could see what they wanted to see, so that I wouldn't seem weird, so that, you know, like I liked things that I didn't think other people liked. I didn't want them to know that I wasn't as confident as I was pretending to be. I didn't want them to know that I was insecure. I used a lot of humor and I thought about making jokes, but I feel like right now I don't really feel very funny. Um, but what ended up happening is that I kind of had this self-talk going on of every time I interacted with a person, it was followed up by a voice in my head telling me, well, why are you wasting your time? You know they don't really like you, they're just pretending to like you. And it's not even you that they like, it's the you you're pretending to be. And when you hear that over and over again, it just, it kills part of you. And you kind of dig yourself into this little pit that you can't get out of. And I tried to just ignore it, but that did not work. So what I did was I started overextending myself. I joined 15 clubs, 5 executive boards. I was way outgoing. I did everything that I thought I was supposed to do to be a good, well-rounded student. And at the same time, when I was busy or too tired, I didn't have time. I didn't have the energy to tell myself, people don't actually like you. You just think that they do. You're wasting your time. But eventually, kind of like, it was like a tolerance had built up. Like my body knew, like, yeah, I know you're busy, but I want to tell you how terrible you are. You can laugh. That's okay. That's a little joke. So I found something else, and I discovered that when I was drinking, I didn't hear anything. And it was so awesome. I loved not hearing that voice. And I could still go throughout my day and still be in 10,000 activities, always busy. You know, I had a crazy Outlook calendar that was color-coded, very, very functional, but at the same time, I was not sober. No one noticed while I was in school. And there were things that I did while in school, while I was drinking, that I should have lost scholarships for. I drank while I was representing the school officially. I snuck alcohol onto a dry campus. There were a lot of things that I did that should have gotten me into a lot of trouble, but because I was so good at pretending that I was well functioning and I was exactly the model of a student leader that people wanted to see, no one really saw the trouble. And then when I left school, it got harder because I didn't have all those activities. You know, it wasn't as structured. I didn't really have a safety net. I was an adult in the world. And all of those insecurities that I had came crumbling back, and they started to kind of punch their way out. And so I thought, well, maybe I'll be better off if I just take some time and I don't drink. You don't need it. You're home. It's fine. And for a while, it was okay. And then right back to where I started with the voices. Like, what are you doing? You're working in food service and you have a degree. Where I know that that's not a bad thing. I know in my heart that, you know, work is work and you should be happy where you're working. But that voice in my head said, you know, people told you that you would have a really great job right now and you don't. Look at you. You are a failure. And that is all I would hear. And so I started drinking again. And the problem that I found out was I now had access to disposable income. And I spent almost every penny I had on alcohol. And I ended up just silencing the voices altogether. I found myself at one point working in an office where I would open up a Diet Coke every morning, and I would take a sip and then put some whiskey in it, and then take a sip and put more whiskey in it. And eventually all of the Diet Coke would be gone, but my can was always full. And I would still just drive home, drive back to work, go into my room, have a drink. And there was probably a solid 2 years where I was not sober at all. I did not like myself. I didn't like how I interacted with people. And the voice that used to tell me that they don't really like you was right, because the drunk and not sober version of me is not great. So the 25% statistic was very true. I got to a point of clarity where I was like, what are you doing? Why are you wasting your time here? There's nothing to be done. You're not being successful. You're not really contributing to anything. And so I prepared. I took Post-it notes and wrote down all of my passwords and left them in my office. I left instructions for people. I went home for the weekend, and I didn't plan on going back. I had recently had shoulder surgery, so I refilled my prescription early. They understood, like, oh, you're in pain, you had a surgery. So I saved up the medication from that. I had told the doctor offhand that I have a sensitive stomach, so they gave me Zofran so I wouldn't throw up, and I was ready. But then, as I put the first few pills in my mouth and I got ready to take a swig, I heard this voice in my head, and it was a friend of mine. It was like a weird, happenstance of a memory that said, no, I care. Go ahead. Tell me what you were saying. And it was just a stupid conversation about a TV show. But in that moment, it was kind of like something outside of myself just knocking on the door, saying, hey, someone cares about you. Someone cares what you have to think. Someone cares about your contribution. And so I spit everything out into my hand, and I stopped. And when I went back to work the following Monday, I put in my notice because I knew that I couldn't work and work on myself at the same time. My parents knew that I was stressed. They didn't know the level of stress. I was really ashamed and afraid to tell them. But they were really supportive of me taking some time to find myself, and I'm very grateful for that. But I left my job, and I didn't work for a while, and I spent a lot of time just thinking, being really mindful. And at one point, I sat down with my mom, I think it was like at a Bob Evans, and I just said, I need help. I don't know what I'm doing, but I need help. And so she, instead of judging me or telling me to just keep it to myself, she told me she was proud of me. And I was so sure that I was going to get judged because people in our family don't have these problems. The people that I've surrounded myself don't have these problems. I was so sure that my shame that I felt would be repeated in the people that I would talk to, that I completely missed the message that the voice in my head was wrong, that people did care about me, that they loved me. And so over the past 5.5 years, I have been depickling. So I've been sober for over 5 years. The first few years were not great for me. I lost a lot of friends because I just couldn't be around them. Because just because I had a problem didn't mean my friends did, so it was hard. I kind of self-isolated. But the biggest thing that I learned is the first person I had to learn to like again was myself. And I got to meet myself authentically for the first time because I wasn't drunk. I, wasn't sloppy. And I got to say, hey, you're a pretty smart girl. You're pretty talented. Look at the things that you're doing. It's okay to do one thing at a time. You don't have to be busy. And I got over a lot of the hang-ups that I had, the self-imposed stigma that I had. Because it's really hard when you come from a really supportive family because you feel like you don't deserve to have the problem that you have. Like, other people had it worse. How dare you feel the way that you feel? But if there's something that I learned, it's that, your experience does not negate someone else's, and their experience doesn't negate yours. I've learned that if you truly want help, you are deserving of it. If you seek help, you are deserving of it. If you seek love and support, you are deserving of it, no matter where you come from. I thought that I was going to be alone. I honestly didn't think I was going to be alive at this point, if you would have asked me 10 years ago. So that's exciting. I for a long time didn't love myself. But I've come to really appreciate the person that I am. The same decisive nature that led to me making poor decisions is now a strength. Um, I sometimes still have bad days, but that's okay because I know that they're just kind of passing, and I have tools in my arsenal to get through them safely. Um, Something I never thought would happen is that I would find, someone to share my life with, and that's really exciting because like I'm getting married in 35 days, which is really like still kind of weird for me. Um, but I would say that with sobriety and with recovery has come this level of hope that I never expected to feel. And it's why I connected with Carol and started working with Rock of Faith, because if we can share this message with people, even if it just reaches the ear of one person, then it's all worth it. All of this effort is worth it. Um, but yeah, that's all I have.
Very, very much for sharing your story and being so honest. I know that you did help somebody out there, and I'm sure somebody was listening to you, and you maybe gave them the courage that they could ask for help. My next speaker is Antoinette Whitaker, and I have to say about Antoinette that I have had the pleasure over the last 5 years of watching this woman completely transform her life in recovery. And it's beautiful. It's the most beautiful thing to watch, and just how far she's come and where she's gone in recovery, and just back out there helping everybody. And I can't wait to hear what she has to tell you. So anyway, Vidya.
Thank you, Carol. And thank you to First Baptist Church of Greater Cleveland for putting on an event like this, inviting me to speak here. This is not somewhere that I ever thought I would end up or something that I ever thought I would be doing. So it's an honor and a privilege to be here today. And I think the work that you guys are doing and continue to do in your 11th year of doing this is super important, because we have been in an opiate epidemic for a decade now, longer than that, and it doesn't seem to be slowing down. Carol read some statistics at the beginning, and Dr. Soros talked about the numbers and the statistics, and things don't seem to be slowing down, but there is help out there. Recovery is possible. I think the three of us that are sitting up here tonight are proof of that. So a little bit about myself. I have been sober since August 4th of 2016. I identify as an alcoholic and a drug addict, like Dr. Soros was talking about, and I love that he went first because so many things that he said I could relate to. He was reading those risk factors of depression and substance use disorder, and I'm thinking in my head while he's reading them, like PTSD, yes, trauma history, yes, and all these things that is part of my story. And I'm not going to go too far into all those things because we would be here for a while. But I was just shocked to hear those things, and it just makes sense. And he also said, he talked about self-medicating anxiety. So for most of my life, I believe that's what I was doing. I was self-medicating my anxiety. I was trying to help my depression, and my drug use and alcohol use began at a young age. I was 13 years old the first time I drank alcohol or tried a substance that was illegal, and it just progressed from there. I believe that I have the disease of alcoholism and drug addiction, and I believe that that disease is progressive and chronic, but it can be treated. So I guess, in a way my disease is in remission right now, but it can very well come back if I do not treat my mental health, if I do not treat my alcoholism. That can return to my life, and the life that I have today is so wonderful. I don't want to give that up. I don't want to go back to where I came from. And Dr. Soros also said, if you had depression and anxiety before COVID-19 and you didn't know it, you found out when COVID-19 started, or it got worse. And that was very much my story too. So, and I'll get to that, but so I'm using alcohol and drugs all through high school, and very much like Kelly, I am a straight A student in high school, and I think that for me, I didn't think that I had a problem because I was a straight-A student. I did pageants when I was in high school. I was a pageant queen. I was a cheerleader. I was in marching band. The disease of alcoholism and addiction and mental health disorders do not discriminate on who they affect. And I always thought for a long time, you know, I had friends who were addicted to drugs, and I never thought for a second that that would be me. But it became me. And this disease runs in my family, and I don't know if that was one of the risk factors that Dr. Soros talked about, but I do have a positive family history for suicide and for substance use disorder. So I have it in my genetics, you know, and I knew that. But I didn't think, like I said, that it was ever going to be me, that those things were ever going to pop up in my life, but they did. And I was in my early 20s, and it just got really bad. The first time I went to treatment, I was treated for opiate use dependence and alcohol use and dependence. And my mother called me one day, and Kelly was talking about it. My mother called me one day, and she just said, "Do you need help?" And I said, "Yes, I do." And I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what kind of help was out there. And I guess I hope, if anything out of today, that somebody watches this, somebody sees this, and they know that help is out there, because I didn't know that. I lived on my own. I maintained jobs and stuff. And like I said, I thought that drug addicts and alcoholics were, you know, I visioned that as people who lived under a bridge or lived outside. Like, I didn't picture it as me, is what I'm getting at. And it was me. So when my mom asked if I need help, I said yes, and I was met with a very non-judgmental response to that. And she helped me get into treatment for the first time. And I joined a 12-step program, and that's what I did for a while. But like I mentioned before, I'd stopped treating my alcoholism, my drug addiction. I never treated my mental health, and I picked back up. And I thought success was measured by my bank account, by how many degrees I had, by the grades that I got, by the car that I drove, by the house that I lived in. And I know that today is not true for me. Success is measured by how I feel about myself inside, how the people around me feel about me. And when I was in active addiction and active alcoholism, the people around me did not want to be around me. I wasn't a pleasant person. I was very sick. I didn't want to be around me. And so I got sober, like I said, August 4th of 2016. And growing up, I had dreams, and I had goals, and I had things that I wanted to be. And I didn't think, you know, when my drug addiction got really bad, I didn't think that those things were going to be possible anymore. But I got sober, and after some time, I was able to go to nursing school, and I became a nurse in my sobriety, which is amazing, and I just feel super grateful. It's such a blessing. I get to work in the field of substance use disorder and mental health, and I get to help people that I was once very much like, and still am if I pick back up today. But I love what Dr. Soros is saying, and I love the focus on mental health, because I was about 4.5 years sober, so not too long ago, and we're in the middle of a pandemic, and I got sober. And although I work in this field, and although, you know, I help a lot of people that have mental health disorders and stuff like that, I thought I just had substance use disorder. And I very much had the stigma around that, and I don't know, I'm not sure why. I think it's because the world has a stigma around mental health that I think is starting to come down. But I didn't even realize that I had it until I was 4.5 years sober, and I didn't want to drink, and I didn't want to get high, but I didn't necessarily want to live either. And I couldn't figure it out, because I was attending my 12-step meetings, I was talking to my sponsor, I was around supportive people, I enjoy my job. You know, I have everything that I need and a lot of what I want, and because of my sobriety and my recovery. But I just was not happy, and I could not figure it out. And it got really bad, and I started to see a therapist, and I started to treat my mental health. In the last 6 months have probably been the best 6 months of my sobriety, because I'm treating both of my issues now, my substance use and my mental health, and I think it's very important that we highlight both of those for people who do have dual diagnosis. We do need, and Dr. Soros was saying, you know, we're starting to get programs out there that are dual diagnosis, but we need more of them. So if you are struggling with either of those, you know, there is help. Recovery is possible. I went from homeless, living in a car, to having a career, helping others, being a wonderful daughter, being a sister, being an aunt, being present in life, and showing up for myself, you know, being kind to myself, being loving to myself. And that was something that, you know, it took me, I'm 31 now, it took me a long time to do. So thank you, Carol, and First Baptist Church of Greater Cleveland for having me here today. Thanks.
Thank you, Antoinette. I really appreciate you coming as well, and thank you so much for sharing your story. I know, again, like it has helped someone. My last speaker today is Adam Papashek, and I know Adam because of the community that I surround myself with. A lot of people know Adam, and they all say, oh, you got to ask Adam, because Adam really is passionate about recovery. Okay, it's really important to him, and he really knows how to work it. And I don't know Adam's story, so I want to hear Adam's story. I'm looking forward to it. And Adam, I really thank you for agreeing. And when I asked him, not even a second's thought, absolutely, of course I'll help you. And he came. So thank you so much. And there's Adam for you.
Thank you, Carol. And I would like to thank you guys for asking me to come speak. Like Carol said, I am definitely very passionate about this. Because, definitely very passionate about this. Because I just look back and know where I was a little 14 months ago. Actually, I had 14 months yesterday. And I was such in a hopeless and helpless place. And, like, I just didn't know what I was going to do. But, so a little bit about myself. 35. I've been sober for 14 months now. I grew up in an alcohol and addiction-based family. My mother used. My father was an alcoholic. And early on, I always told myself I'm never going to be like that. You know what I'm saying? So I went through life just looking for acceptance and trying to find who I was in other people. And so that was a big part of why I used. And then when I found out that there was something out there that would make me feel better or make me not feel at all, then I finally found like I had something to take me out of myself. I have a lot of things that went on in my life, but that doesn't make me alcoholic. My choices, I've always had the power of choice. I made my own choices, and that's what makes me an addicted person and alcoholic. So there's help, sorry. I'm not really good at this. But, yeah, so I'm just going to go into how it's like today, because that is what's really, really important to me. I could tell you all day about things that have happened and try to qualify and have people out there qualify me, but that's not what it's about. It's about what I do today, because, like I said in the beginning, a year ago today, I would have never thought I'd be in a chair talking to anybody about addiction. I was ready to go to the ends of whatever it was until, I wasn't here no more. So today, I go day by day. I try to help out wherever I can. I have I have to keep a positive support group around me, because I can't do this myself. I've tried time and time again and thought it was me, that I can take control and I can gain control and keep it, but it would never worked out. So I have to surround myself with positive people that support me and show me the way, because I don't know how to do this on my own. Oh, sorry. I apologize. So yeah, today I just try to help people wherever I can and take suggestions, and to, live every day like just to help, Thank you, Carol, for asking me to speak. And
Thanks, Adam. Thank you for coming. I thank you for agreeing to come. Again, I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. I'd like to thank Sharday Hollins and Relevant Therapies for making this possible with the grant again this year, so that we could bring this to the community, and hoping to let people know and make them aware that if you are struggling, there is help out there, and to please reach out. Again, I'd also like to remind you that the Rock of Faith concert will be on September 25th at 7 p.m. right here at First Baptist Church of Greater Cleveland in the sanctuary. Mask will be required. And if you don't want to wear a mask in the sanctuary, you can watch us online on our YouTube channel, whichever is more comfortable for you. But we will be talking about addiction and recovery. We will be talking about the transformation of the soul. And we will be taking you through the journey so that you can know what it is like to be in addiction and how it feels, and then where you go in recovery and how that feels in your soul. Again, thank you all for joining us, and don't forget, if anyone is interested in a NARCAN kit or a doTERRA bag, we will be here on September 11th in the parking lot of First Baptist Church, along with the food distribution from the Ohio Food Bank. For those that are in need, please come and reach out. It's all free to you if you need it. Thank you.